What if Constantinople never fell?
The walls hold. Constantine XI. Palaiologos stands on the ramparts, watching Ottoman cannons tear chunks from fortifications that have protected the city for over 1,000 years. His commanders tell him the situation is hopeless. The garrison numbers barely 8,000 against Mehmed II's army of 80,000. The walls, 20 feet thick in places, are crumbling under bombardment from cannons that fire stone balls weighing over half a ton. The Golden Horn is blocked by an Ottoman chain. The Bosphorus is controlled by enemy ships. Food runs low. Ammunition dwindles. Morale collapses. But then Venetian relief ships break through the blockade. Then Genoese reinforcements land under cover of darkness. Then Hungarian engineers arrive with counter-battery techniques that neutralize the Ottoman cannons. The siege, which should have ended in conquest, instead becomes a stalemate. Mehmed II, facing supply problems of his own and rebellions in Anatolia that demand attention, withdraws. Constantinople survives. The Byzantine Empire, reduced to a city-state clinging to existence, is granted a reprieve that changes the course of civilization. The Ottoman Empire in this timeline faces a very different trajectory. Mehmed II, known historically as the Conqueror, instead becomes Mehmed the Frustrated. The failure at Constantinople is not just a military defeat, but a psychological blow. Ottoman expansion had been the dominant force in the region for decades. Conquering Constantinople was meant to legitimize Ottoman claims to be the successor of Rome, to be the preeminent power bridging Europe and Asia. Without that victory, the momentum stalls. The Janissaries, elite troops who expected plunder from a successful siege, are dissatisfied. The Anatolian nobility questions whether Mehmed is the strong leader they need. Rivals within the Ottoman royal family see opportunity. Mehmed survives these challenges through political skill and by redirecting Ottoman military energy elsewhere. If Constantinople cannot be taken, then expansion continues in other directions. The Ottomans push deeper into the Balkans, subduing Serbia completely and raiding into Hungary. They expand eastward into Anatolia, bringing more Turkish beyliks under direct control. They move south along the Mediterranean coast, but the symbolic center of their ambitions, the city Constantine founded, remains frustratingly independent. Constantinople itself is in a precarious position. The city survived, but at enormous cost. The population, already depleted by decades of decline, has dropped further. Entire neighborhoods lie empty. The great palaces and churches are maintained, but barely. The empire's territory consists of the city itself, a few islands, and some scattered footholds on nearby coasts. Revenue comes from trade, from tariffs on goods passing through the Bosphorus, and from payments from various powers, who find it useful to keep Constantinople independent as a buffer and trading post. Emperor Constantine XI, having led the successful defense, gains legendary status. He becomes a symbol of Christian resistance against Islamic expansion, a hero celebrated from Rome to Moscow. This gives him political capital to use in rebuilding the empire's position. He reaches out to potential allies, to the Italian maritime republics, who have commercial interests in maintaining access to Black Sea trade, to Hungary and other Balkan powers, who need Constantinople as a bulwark against Ottoman expansion, and most importantly to the rising power of Muscovy, which sees itself as the protector of Orthodox Christianity. The relationship between Constantinople and Moscow becomes crucial. Grand Prince Ivan III of Moscow, seeking to legitimize his own expanding realm, embraces the role of defender of orthodoxy. He sends financial aid to Constantinople, pays for repairs to churches, and funds the hiring of mercenaries. In exchange, Constantinople provides legitimacy. The Byzantine Emperor, though ruling only a city-state, is still the heir to Rome, still the supreme authority in Orthodox Christianity. When Ivan marries Sophia Palaiologina, a Byzantine princess, the connection is formalized. Moscow begins calling itself the Third Rome, the successor to Constantinople, as the center of true Christian civilization. This creates a very different dynamic in Eastern Europe. Instead of Constantinople falling and Moscow claiming to be its successor, you have Constantinople surviving and Moscow being its protector and ally. The Byzantine Emperor maintains theoretical supremacy, but Moscow has the actual military and economic power. It's a partnership of convenience, where Constantinople provides legitimacy and Moscow provides security. Over time, as Moscow grows stronger and Constantinople remains weak, the relationship becomes increasingly unequal, but the forms are maintained. The Italian city-states, particularly Venice and Genoa, maintain their trading colonies around the Black Sea because Constantinople's survival keeps the trade routes more accessible. The flow of goods from the east, silks and spices and luxury items, continues through the traditional routes rather than forcing Europeans to seek alternative paths. This has profound economic consequences. The Italian maritime republics remain wealthy and powerful for longer. The economic center of Europe stays more oriented toward the Mediterranean. But this also means less incentive for Atlantic exploration. The historical Portuguese and Spanish voyages of exploration were driven partly by the desire to bypass Ottoman control of eastern trade routes. With Constantinople surviving and maintaining relatively open trade, the pressure to find sea routes to India and China is reduced. Portuguese exploration down the African coast still happens, driven by access to African gold and the religious mission of fighting Islam from the south. But the urgency is less. Columbus still proposes his western route to Asia, but it's a harder sell to monarchs who can obtain eastern goods through established routes. The Americas are still discovered eventually. Perhaps Genoese or Venetian explorers, working for Italian cities, seeking new opportunities, cross the Atlantic. Perhaps the Portuguese, having rounded Africa, stumble upon South America. The discovery comes later, perhaps decades later, and happens differently. The initial colonization is less driven by Spanish and Portuguese monarchies and more by Italian city-states or by trading companies. The pattern of colonization develops differently, potentially more commercial and less focused on territorial conquest. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Protestant Reformation still occurs. Martin Luther still nails his theses to the church door. The theological and political issues that drove the Reformation are not affected by Constantinople's survival. But the Catholic Church's response is influenced. In our timeline, the fall of Constantinople was used as evidence of Christian division and weakness. In this timeline, Constantinople's survival becomes a Catholic argument for unity. Look what happens when Christians stand together, they say. The Orthodox and Catholic split remains, but there are more serious efforts at reconciliation. Several church councils attempt to heal the schism, ultimately failing, but creating more dialogue. The Holy Roman Empire develops along similar lines historically, fragmented and increasingly divided by religion. The Habsburg dynasty still rises to dominance, building its power through strategic marriages and inheritance. But the Ottoman threat to Central Europe is somewhat reduced because Ottoman resources are spread across multiple fronts, and the psychological impact of failing to take Constantinople undermines their aura of invincibility. Hungary survives longer as an independent kingdom, not partitioned between Ottomans and Habsburgs. This creates a stronger buffer state in Central Europe that changes the balance of power. The Ottoman Empire, unable to claim the mantle of conquering Constantinople, develops a different imperial ideology. Rather than emphasizing continuity with Rome, Ottoman propaganda stresses Islamic legitimacy and Turkish military prowess. The sultans invest more heavily in religious institutions, building grand mosques to rival Constantinople's churches, patronizing Islamic scholarship, and positioning themselves as defenders of Sunni Islam against both Christian infidels and Shia heretics. The Ottoman cultural identity becomes more explicitly Islamic and less universalist. Ottoman expansion continues, but runs into limits. In the east, the Safavid Persian Empire is a major rival, and the two powers fight numerous wars over Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and religious supremacy. In the west, the Habsburgs and their allies contain Ottoman advances. The Siege of Vienna, historically a turning point in Ottoman decline, might not happen at all, or happens under different circumstances. The Ottomans remain a great power, but not as dominant as they were historically at their peak. Constantinople becomes a unique political entity, a tiny territorial state with enormous symbolic importance. It's a city-state that punches far above its weight diplomatically because control of the Bosphorus gives it strategic value, and its position as the traditional capital of Eastern Christianity gives it religious significance. Every major power maintains an embassy in Constantinople. The emperor mediates disputes, hosts conferences, and plays major powers against each other to maintain independence. It's a precarious game, requiring constant diplomatic skill. The city itself becomes a cultural crossroads of extraordinary richness. With trade flowing through Constantinople and the city maintaining independence, it attracts merchants, scholars, artists, and adventurers from across the known world. You have Orthodox Greeks, Catholic Italians, Muslim Turks, and Armenian Christians, all living in different quarters, conducting business, exchanging ideas. The intellectual ferment is remarkable. Greek classical learning, which historically fled to Italy after Constantinople's fall, instead remains in the city, creating a vibrant Renaissance in place. Byzantine scholars, not scattered as refugees, but secure in their city, continue the classical tradition. They translate ancient texts, comment on philosophy and science, and engage with Latin scholars visiting from the West. This creates a different pattern for the Renaissance. Instead of being primarily a Western European phenomenon centered in Italy, you have two Renaissance centers, one in Italy and one in Constantinople, cross-pollinating ideas. The revival of classical learning happens sooner and spreads across a broader geography. The printing press, invented in Germany regardless of Constantinople's fate, reaches the Byzantine capital quickly. Greek printing presses are established, publishing classical texts, religious works, and contemporary scholarship. This makes Greek learning more accessible and accelerates the spread of knowledge. The University of Constantinople, refounded and expanded, becomes one of Europe's leading educational institutions, attracting students from Orthodox lands and beyond. Religious politics in this timeline are fascinating. The Orthodox Church, with Constantinople surviving, maintains its traditional hierarchy and prestige. The Patriarch of Constantinople remains the first among equals in Orthodox Christianity, and his authority is not contested by Moscow to the same degree as in our timeline. The relationship between Moscow and Constantinople involves tension between Russian power and Byzantine legitimacy, between newer churches and the ancient patriarchal sees. The Russian Church wants autonomy and respect for its own importance. The Byzantine Church wants to maintain its traditional preeminence. The negotiations and occasional conflicts over ecclesiastical authority shape Orthodox Christianity's development. The Ottoman Empire, unable to eliminate Constantinople, eventually pragmatically accepts its existence. Trade is too valuable to completely disrupt. A modus vivendi emerges where Constantinople maintains independence in exchange for nominal tribute and agreements not to shelter Ottoman enemies. It's an uneasy peace, periodically threatened by incidents and nearly broken by conflicts, but generally holding because both sides benefit from the arrangement. This has implications for the broader Islamic-Christian relationship. With Constantinople surviving as a Christian capital in the heart of what the Ottomans consider their sphere, there's a living example of coexistence. The city becomes a model, imperfect and troubled, for how different religious communities can coexist. Muslim merchants do business in Constantinople. Christian merchants do business in Ottoman cities. The religious divide remains real and conflicts still occur, but the total antagonism is slightly softened by practical considerations. The Balkan region develops very differently. With Constantinople surviving, many Balkan Christians see less reason to accommodate Ottoman rule. Resistance movements have a rallying point. The Serbian, Bulgarian, and Albanian churches maintain stronger connections to Constantinople. When uprisings occur, Constantinople provides support, diplomatic, if not military. The Ottoman control over the Balkans remains contested for much longer, with periodic rebellions and wars of independence starting earlier than they did historically. The Black Sea trade becomes a major point of competition between multiple powers. Constantinople controls the straits, but doesn't have the military power to dominate the region. The Ottoman Empire has the largest Black Sea coastline, but can't monopolize trade. Genoa and Venice maintain colonies. The Crimean Tatars control the northern coast for a time before being absorbed by the expanding Russian Empire. Poland-Lithuania has access through rivers. The result is a complex multilateral trade network where no single power dominates, but all compete and cooperate in varying combinations. The economic dynamism this creates is significant. Competition drives innovation. New financial instruments are developed to handle complex multi-party transactions. Maritime insurance becomes more sophisticated. The banking families of Italy extend their operations into Constantinople and Black Sea ports. Capital accumulates and seeks investment opportunities, funding everything from ship construction to mining operations to early manufacturing enterprises. The scientific revolution, when it comes, is influenced by this environment. Greek mathematical and astronomical texts are more readily available because Constantinople's libraries are intact. Arabic scientific works flow through Constantinople's markets. The synthesis of different intellectual traditions happens more naturally. When Copernicus develops his heliocentric model, he's building on a foundation that includes not just Latin sources, but Greek and Arabic ones accessed more easily through Constantinople's scholarly networks. The Counter-Reformation in the Catholic Church is influenced by the existence of a surviving Orthodox rival. Catholic reformers point to Constantinople's survival as evidence that traditional Christianity, properly defended, can withstand any challenge. But they also feel pressure to demonstrate Catholic superiority over Orthodox Christianity. This drives both missionary work in newly discovered lands and reform efforts to address corruption and abuse. The Council of Trent's decisions are influenced by the need to compete with Orthodox Christianity for the allegiance of Christians in Eastern Europe. The rise of nation-states across Europe proceeds roughly as historically. France, England, Spain, and others centralize power, develop bureaucracies, and build standing armies. But the diplomatic landscape includes Constantinople as a player. The Byzantine Emperor, though ruling a tiny territory, has status as a legitimate sovereign and controls strategically vital territory. European powers court Constantinople, seek alliances, and use it as a counter in their diplomatic games. Treaties often include provisions about free passage through the Bosphorus or protection of Constantinople's independence. The 30 Years' War, that devastating conflict that ravaged Central Europe, might be different in details, but similar in kind. The religious and political tensions that caused it exist regardless of Constantinople's fate. But perhaps Constantinople plays a role as a mediator or as a symbol. Orthodox Russia, allied to Constantinople, might intervene differently in Central European affairs. The war's outcome and the Peace of Westphalia might include provisions about Constantinople and the treatment of Orthodox minorities in Europe. Colonial empires develop, but perhaps with Italian city-states playing a larger role. With the Italian maritime republics remaining wealthy and powerful through their role in Eastern trade, they have capital and motivation to establish colonies. Genoese or Venetian colonies in the Americas could create very different colonial dynamics, potentially more focused on trade than on territorial conquest and settlement. The patterns of cultural exchange, of disease transmission, of economic exploitation would all be influenced by having different colonial powers involved. The Enlightenment, when it emerges, has Constantinople as one of its centers. The city's cosmopolitan character, its role as a crossroads, and its classical heritage make it a natural site for Enlightenment thought. Philosophers in Constantinople debate reason and revelation, natural law and traditional authority, progress and custom. These debates happen in Greek and are translated into other languages, spreading Enlightenment ideas eastward into Russian lands and southward into Ottoman territories, as well as westward into Europe. The Industrial Revolution begins in Britain as historically, driven by coal resources, textile demand, and financial capital. But the industrial techniques spread differently. Constantinople, as a major trading hub, quickly adopts industrial technologies. Factories are built in the city and its surroundings. The Ottoman Empire, seeing the power industry gives to European countries, pushes modernization programs more urgently. Russia, determined to keep up with the West and protect Constantinople, industrializes aggressively. The geographic spread of industrialization is broader and more even than in our timeline. Political revolutions sweep across Europe and beyond. The French Revolution still happens, driven by domestic French political and economic crises. The Napoleonic Wars follow, reshaping Europe. But Constantinople is a factor in these conflicts. Napoleon, dreaming of empire, considers an eastern campaign to conquer Constantinople and claim the mantle of Caesar. Russian opposition, backed by British naval support, prevents this. The Congress of Vienna, reconstructing Europe after Napoleon's defeat, includes provisions guaranteeing Constantinople's independence as part of the balance of power system. The 19th century sees the rise of nationalism as a powerful political force. This affects Constantinople profoundly. Greek nationalism, which historically aimed to recreate Byzantine greatness after Ottoman rule, instead has a living Byzantine state to rally around. But that state is tiny, an emperor ruling a city-state. Greek nationalists want to expand, to liberate Greeks living under Ottoman rule, to recreate something approaching the historical Byzantine Empire's glory. This creates a Greek nationalist movement that is irredentist and expansionist, viewing Constantinople as the capital of a restored, greater Greece. The Ottoman Empire faces nationalist movements among its many ethnic groups: Arabs, Armenians, Kurds, and various Balkan peoples all develop national consciousness and demand autonomy or independence. The existence of Constantinople as an independent Christian state in the region serves as both inspiration and irritant. It proves that the Ottoman Empire is not invincible, that small states can survive through diplomacy and foreign support. This encourages other nationalist movements, but also makes the Ottomans more paranoid about foreign interference. The Crimean War, fought over the declining Ottoman Empire and Russian expansion, involves Constantinople directly. Russia claims to be protecting Constantinople and Orthodox Christians throughout the Ottoman Empire. Britain and France, determined to prevent Russian expansion, support the Ottomans. But they also want to preserve Constantinople's independence. The war's outcome includes international guarantees for Constantinople, making it a formally neutral city-state under collective European protection. This internationalization of Constantinople creates a unique legal status. The opening of the Suez Canal has different implications in this timeline. With Constantinople controlling the Bosphorus and maintaining generally good relations with European powers, the northern route from Europe to Asia remains viable. The Suez Canal is still valuable, but it's not as uniquely important. The British don't dominate Egypt as thoroughly, and the strategic competition over canal control is less intense. Egypt develops more independently, not as a British puppet. The scramble for Africa proceeds as European powers partition the continent. Constantinople, though not a colonial power, has interests as a trading nation. Byzantine merchants have been involved in North African and Red Sea trade for centuries. When European colonialism threatens these traditional trading relationships, Constantinople protests but lacks the power to do anything substantial. This creates resentment and a sense that the great powers ignore Byzantine interests, which feeds into a Byzantine inferiority complex and nationalism. The unification of Germany creates a new great power in Central Europe. The German Empire under Prussian leadership becomes a major player in the balance of power. German interests extend into Ottoman territories through railway concessions and investment. The Berlin to Baghdad railway project, designed to give Germany access to the Middle East, requires agreement from Constantinople for passage through Byzantine-controlled territory. The negotiations over this become a major diplomatic issue, with Russia opposing the railway as a German intrusion into its sphere of influence. The First World War, when it comes, erupts for reasons similar to those in our timeline. The alliance system, the arms race, the imperial rivalries, and the nationalist tensions all exist. The assassination of an Austrian archduke or some similar incident triggers the catastrophe. But the war unfolds differently because Constantinople is an independent actor. The Ottoman Empire might side with the Central Powers as historically, or it might remain neutral, or it might even join the Entente if offered sufficient incentives. Constantinople, with its strategic location, is courted by both sides. If Constantinople sides with the Entente, It becomes a base for operations against the Ottoman Empire and a symbol of the war, being a defense of Christian civilization against German aggression. If it remains neutral, it becomes a site where all powers maintain embassies and where secret negotiations occur. If somehow circumstances push it toward the Central Powers, it creates a bizarre situation of the Byzantine Empire allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Most likely, Constantinople tries to remain neutral, but is forced to choose sides by pressure from great powers. The war devastates Europe regardless. Millions die in trench warfare, naval battles, and air combat. Empires collapse. The Russian Revolution overthrows the Tsarist regime, and the Soviet Union emerges. But the Bolsheviks face a different situation. The Orthodox Church, with Constantinople surviving, has a clearer institutional structure and international backing. When the Soviets attempt to suppress religion, Constantinople condemns this and provides support to persecuted Russian Orthodox believers. The conflict between Soviet atheism and Orthodox Christianity is sharper and more internationalized. The Treaty of Versailles and related settlements after the war reshaped the world. The Ottoman Empire, whether it fought or stayed neutral, is stripped of most of its non-Turkish territories. Arab lands become British and French mandates. Armenia and Kurdistan might gain independence or autonomy. The Turkish nationalist movement under someone like Mustafa Kemal Atatürk emerges, fighting to preserve Turkish control of Anatolia. Constantinople's status is debated at the peace conference. Some suggest making it an international city under League of Nations control. Others argue for maintaining its independence. The final settlement probably enlarges Constantinople's territory somewhat, giving it control of both sides of the Bosphorus and perhaps some of the surrounding region, but keeps it small enough not to threaten anyone. The interwar period sees Constantinople trying to modernize and maintain relevance. The city industrializes further, develops its port facilities, and positions itself as a bridge between East and West. The population grows as refugees from various conflicts seek safety. The emperor, by this point, ruling under a constitution with an elected parliament, balances between tradition and modernity. Constantinople joins the League of Nations as a member state, using the international forum to protect its interests. The rise of fascism and communism as competing ideologies creates pressure on Constantinople. The Soviet Union sees the Byzantine Empire as a relic of the feudal past and a tool of capitalist powers. Fascist Italy, claiming to be the heir of Rome, resents Constantinople's claim to Roman continuity. Nazi Germany, when it emerges, has little direct interest in Constantinople, but views it as part of the decadent democratic order to be swept away. Constantinople's survival depends on the balance of power and on playing rival powers against each other as it has for centuries. The Second World War breaks out over many of the same issues as in our timeline. German aggression, the failure of appeasement, and the alliance system pull Europe into catastrophic conflict. Constantinople declares neutrality, wanting no part in another devastating war. But neutrality is difficult. Germany demands free passage through the Bosphorus for ships supplying its allies. The Soviets demand Constantinople deny passage to German vessels. Britain needs the Mediterranean route open. The pressure on Constantinople is enormous. The city likely manages to maintain a precarious neutrality through the war. Similar to Switzerland or Sweden, it becomes a hub for espionage, as all powers maintain agents there. Refugees flow through Constantinople, fleeing the war. Diplomats use the city as neutral ground for secret negotiations. The war rages around Constantinople, but the city itself is spared direct combat, because no power wants to trigger intervention by others by attacking it. When the war ends with Germany defeated and the atomic age dawning, the world enters the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States emerge as superpowers locked in ideological and geopolitical competition. Constantinople finds itself in an extremely difficult position. Geographically, it's right on the border between Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe and the Western Sphere. The Soviets want to control the Bosphorus to ensure their Black Sea fleet can access the Mediterranean. The Americans and British want to deny Soviet control and maintain Constantinople's independence as a Western-aligned barrier. Constantinople joins NATO, the Western Defensive Alliance, because Soviet pressure leaves no alternative. Soviet demands for joint control of the Straits and for military bases in Byzantine territory are unacceptable. This makes Constantinople a frontline state in the Cold War. American military advisors arrive. NATO bases are established. The Byzantine military is modernized with Western equipment. The city becomes one of the most heavily fortified places on Earth, bristling with weapons and defenses against potential Soviet attack. The Cold War involves Constantinople in multiple crises. During the Berlin blockade, tensions rise around Constantinople as the Soviets hint at closing the Bosphorus in retaliation. During the Korean War, Constantinople provides logistical support for NATO forces. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet submarines transit the Bosphorus, and Byzantine forces track them, nearly causing an incident. Every crisis in the Cold War has potential implications for Constantinople's strategic position. Domestically, Constantinople modernizes rapidly. Marshall Plan aid flows in, rebuilding infrastructure and industry. Democracy deepens as political parties compete in elections. The population grows, reaching several million. The economy shifts from trade and traditional crafts to modern industry and services. The old city walls are preserved as monuments, while modern neighborhoods expand beyond them. Constantinople in the latter 20th century is a bustling, cosmopolitan city, nominally ruled by an emperor who is now a constitutional monarch, actually governed by elected parliaments and prime ministers. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s changes everything. Suddenly, the existential threat that shaped Constantinople's foreign policy for decades disappears. The newly independent states emerging from the Soviet collapse include Ukraine, Georgia, and others around the Black Sea. Constantinople now has new neighbors and new trading partners. The geopolitical landscape is transformed. Constantinople shifts from being a frontline Cold War state to being a bridge between Europe and the newly independent states of the former Soviet sphere. The 21st century sees Constantinople grappling with globalization, migration, and identity. The city is deeply connected to global economic networks. Its financial sector handles enormous flows of capital. Its port is one of the busiest in the world. But questions of identity persist. Is Constantinople primarily Greek, heir to ancient Byzantine traditions? Is it a cosmopolitan international city belonging to no single nationality? How does it balance tradition and modernity, religious heritage and secular governance, independence and integration into larger structures like the European Union? The European Union debates whether to admit Constantinople. Some argue that the Byzantine Empire, though tiny, is European and Christian and should be welcomed. Others worry about the precedent of admitting such a small state, about Turkey's reaction, about complications with Byzantine claims to be the legitimate Roman Empire, conflicting with EU member Italy's own Roman heritage. The debate is unresolved as Constantinople navigates between full EU membership, some associate status, and maintaining independence outside the Union. Turkey, the modern successor to the Ottoman Empire, has a complex relationship with Constantinople. Turkish nationalists resent that Constantinople remained independent, seeing it as a historical humiliation. Turkish liberals see Constantinople as a neighbor and potential partner. Economic ties are extensive, with massive trade flowing in both directions. But historical grievances and territorial questions create friction. Turkey wants recognition of its own historical legitimacy. Constantinople wants Turkey to acknowledge historical injustices. The two states maintain diplomatic relations, but with underlying tensions. The question of Constantinople's future becomes acute when archaeological excavations beneath the city uncover something unexpected. Deep below the ancient foundations, in chambers that predate the city Constantine founded, researchers find artifacts that shouldn't exist, technology that doesn't match any known historical civilization, inscriptions in no recognized language, materials that analysis cannot identify. The discovery is kept secret initially as scholars try to understand what they've found. The implications are staggering if what they're finding is real. Evidence of an advanced civilization existing thousands of years before recorded history in the exact location where Constantinople was built. This suggests that the site's strategic and spiritual significance might have far deeper roots than anyone imagined. The research team expands, bringing in experts from multiple fields. Carbon dating gives impossible results. Linguistic analysis of the inscriptions suggests they might not be human in origin. Material science cannot explain the composition of the artifacts. The secret leaks, as secrets do. Rumors spread through academic circles. Journalists start investigating. Foreign intelligence agencies take interest. The Byzantine government faces pressure to reveal what's been found or to deny the rumors. But the research is incomplete, the implications unclear. If they announce a discovery this significant prematurely, and it turns out to be misinterpreted, the embarrassment would be enormous. If they suppress it and the truth emerges anyway, the cover-up would be scandalous. Then something happens that forces the issue. One of the artifacts, a device of unknown purpose, activates. Researchers don't know what triggered it or what it does, but it begins emitting energy and signals that are detected by monitoring stations around the world. Seismographs register unusual readings. Radio telescopes pick up strange signals. Satellites observe anomalies in the electromagnetic field around Constantinople. Within hours, every major power knows something extraordinary is happening. The Byzantine government can no longer maintain secrecy. They announce that archaeological excavations have uncovered artifacts of unknown origin that are now active. The global reaction is immediate and chaotic. Scientists demand access. Governments demand information. Conspiracy theorists declare vindication. Religious leaders debate theological implications. The United Nations calls an emergency session to discuss how to handle a discovery that might represent first contact with non-human intelligence or evidence of a previous advanced human civilization or something else entirely. And in the chamber beneath Constantinople, the device continues its function, whatever that function is, sending signals into space, or through time or across dimensions, calling something or someone, or just announcing its reactivation after thousands of years dormant. while the whole world watches and waits to see what happens next.